Wedding season is in full bloom, and if you've been wanting a straighter smile, look no further than Bite. Bite offers clear teeth aligners that help you transform your smile from the comfort of your home or wherever you'll be this time of year. Forget the endless trips to the dentist. Bite's clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered straight to your doorstep. Just take an impression mold of your mouth, preview your 3D smile, and order your all-day or at-night aligners. Bite also knows that wedding season is expensive enough as it is. Their aligners cost thousands less than braces. It's time to let your smile shine. Get started on your smile journey by visiting Byte.com and use code WONDERY at checkout to get your at-home impression kit for only $14.95. That's BYTE.com, code WONDERY to get over 80% off your impression kit.
I'll be totally honest. I didn't know much about Duncan Sheik. I'm a pretty big music fan, but he had somehow escaped my notice. I had heard "Barely Breathing," I guess, when his big hit back in the '90s, but I was too busy listening to Pavement and other indie rock bands, so that he never really got onto my radar in a big way. But then somebody recently pointed out to me that he's a meditator. In fact, he's been doing it for a while, and it's been a big part of his creative process. So we invited him to come in, and he did. And I was super impressed and charmed by the guy, and I think you will be too. So I give you Duncan Sheik.
From ABC, this is the 10% Happier Podcast. I'm Dan Harris. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks
really
for having me.
appreciate
it.
Yeah. My wife was psyched when I told her that you were coming on
nice.
the show. She didn't know until this morning. She's like, "What? You got Duncan Sheik on the show?"
Tell her I say hi.
I will. She's very rarely impressed with me, so this was a win.
I'm sure that's not true.
No, it's definitely true. So how did you become a Buddhist?
So I went to Brown University, and my freshman year I was taking a bunch of classes about Eastern religions kind of generally. And I was I think I had been interested in it in high school, and kind of lapsed Catholic, pretty standard typical story of like when I was 14 or 15 I just basically started to not buy into the dogma, and the summer between my freshman and sophomore year I went to L.A. to visit a relative of mine, actually my mother's cousin, and she had been practicing Buddhism since the early 70s, and specifically with the Soka Gakkai. So she had been
Soka Gakkai.
Soka Gakkai, which is it's sort of the lay Buddhist organization of Nichiren Buddhism, which is the Japanese form of Buddhism that I practice. And basically you chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So that's the essential part of the practice.
You just run that. You chant what?
Nam-myoho Renge Kyo.
And you chant it aloud or internally?
You chant it aloud. You have a mandala, which is called a gohanzen, and sort of set up in an altar. So every morning and evening, I'll chant for maybe, sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes hopefully it's an hour, sometimes it's even longer. But, depending on what's going on in my day and my life, I chant, every morning and every evening. And it's, been a daily practice of mine since I was 19.
How do your neighbors feel about this?
They can't hear it. It's quite subtle, but it's interesting because when I started practicing, I was 19, and of course I had been playing music for a long time, but I was an incredibly self-conscious performer and singer, and there was something about chanting where you're just kind of sitting on one note, kind of continually, that really taught me how to sing one note. And I think there's something great about if you know how to sing one note, then possibly you can learn how to sing two notes, and then maybe three, and then maybe four. And there was something really great about using my voice in this very calm and specific way that helped me a lot, in terms of becoming somebody who could actually get on stage and sing.
Well, I have a million questions.
Yeah.
So let me start with this. When I was, I say this all the time when I meet people who started practicing either meditation or Buddhism or both early. Because when I was 19, I was an idiot and a jerk. And if somebody had said, yeah, you should start chanting this thing, I would have been like, yeah, go pound sand. No way.
Yes.
So what about you allowed that idea to lodge itself in your brain?
Well, okay, it's a great question because I also felt the same way. I mean, I wouldn't say I was a total idiot, but I was sort of a snob. I was like an intellectual snob about religion, and I just felt like, oh, you can't. I was like, I liked the Krishnamurti idea that there was no particular practice that anyone should be following. You just sort of like perceived stuff, through the ether. I don't know what I was thinking. But I had this series of arguments with my mother's cousin while I was staying there in L.A. And basically she said to me, look, you can study Buddhism all you want and you can understand the intellectual precepts of it all you want, and that's fine, that's positive. But unless you sit down and practice, it's not going to have any real powerful effect on your life. It's not going to change. It's not going to change your karma. It's not going to change your kind of, your mission, your destiny, so to speak. So I sort of took that as a challenge, I guess. And so I sat down and I said, okay, well, I'll chant and I'll see what happens and I'll let you know. And so I think the first day I sat down, I chanted for like 2 hours, which is a really long time to be doing that the first time. And my aunt was very sweet. She was sort of like, okay, I think that's like enough for today. But I do have to say it was subtle. It wasn't this like, aha moment, but I did feel this kind of sense of, I don't know, hopefulness and also a sense of like creative energy that seemed to be kind of welling up and excitement about possibilities in the future. And this is, as a 19-year-old where I didn't know that much about Buddhism, it was just more a feeling. So that's where it started. I, have been pretty consistent since then.
And how, do you sit in an interesting way, or can you just sit in a chair?
You can sit in a chair, but I kneel. Like if I'm doing, like I try to do some yoga as well. So if I'm, if my yoga practice is pretty good, I sit kind of in virasana, I guess is the position you would call it, and chant for however long I feel I need to. And believe me, it's sort of like running or like anything else, like in a way, like the more you can chant for 10 minutes and it's good, it kind of gets your blood pumping, so to speak. But if you do it for an hour, it has a much more intense effect.
I'm curious about the effect because as a meditator, I know what meditation does for you. I mean, I think I do sort of basic mindfulness meditation, which is the beginning practice that I think most people who bump up against Buddhism are taught, which is watch your breath, and when you get distracted, start again.
Is it Vipassana?
Vipassana, yes, or insight meditation.
Yeah, okay.
So I mean, I get the for beginners, the fruit of the practice really is you see A, that your mind's out of control, and you see B, that there's a mechanism for training it to be more focused and less yanked around by your emotions.
Right.
Not complicated.
Yeah.
I don't really understand what chanting does for you, and even though I'm no longer 19, I'm 45. I'm still kind of an idiot and a jerk, and like my reflexive response to the idea of chanting is negative.
Right. I totally understand that, and I, as somebody who watches endless amounts of Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and all the four horsemen of the apocalypse, I do understand that impulse very well about like, oh, this is sort of mystical, magical mumbo jumbo. I get it. But I will say that, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, well, first, it's a kind of a rhythmic thing. So there is something that does happen, I think, physiologically when you're kind of in that rhythm and you're chanting that thing. It changes how you breathe. I think it changes many things about how your whole body is functioning. How the relationship of your brain to your heart, to your whole circulatory system. So I do think that it has a really positive aspect in that regard. Also, like I think of it like Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to me is like it's kind of like I think of it. There are these laws that govern the universe. There's gravity. There's electromagnetism. There's the second law of thermodynamics, nothing is ever created or destroyed. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to Buddhists is sort of like this law that underlies all the it's like the law of cause and effect. So you're getting in rhythm with that huge kind of force, so to speak.
Is there an element of mindfulness to it? I view mindfulness. There are a lot of ways to define it, but I view it as just the mental skill that you can train to see what's happening in your mind without getting carried away by it. And I found that to be remarkably useful, especially like in marriage.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do think there's an element of that. I think for me, I use the practice as a way of focusing on, how can I create value in the world, in society? How can I create value for myself, for the people in my environment, and, within the culture, as somebody who makes art for a living, how can I do that in the best way possible? That's what chanting gives me.
I don't know, obviously. I think my questions are demonstrating how little I know about Nichiren Buddhism. Mm-hmm. So it's Japanese. It's not Zen, though.
No.
And
yeah, Nichiren was sort of a competitor is the wrong word, but he was a Buddhist reformer. Buddhism in Japan in the Middle Ages was mostly practiced by kind of aristocrats and priests, kind of quite frankly kind of corrupt priesthood who was, the typical thing of administering expensive funerals and, bestowing talismans on aristocrats who would pay them a lot of money, and it was sort of a racket. And so Nichiren was this reformer who kind of came in and said, Buddhism is for everybody. It's for the common people. It's for women. It was a very shocking idea at the time. And he was persecuted and he was castigated and he remonstrated with the government. He's a really interesting historical figure. And so, but this form of Buddhism that he originated, it wasn't practiced by very many people for 700 years. It wasn't until the kind of 1930s in Japan where a group of educators, this guy Tsunisburo Makaguchi, he kind of popularized the practice, and it really took off in pre-World War II Japan. And especially after World War II, it really took off because the country was decimated and people were really looking for something, to kind of pull themselves out of that situation. So it has a pretty fascinating history.
You ever think you could write a play about it?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I have, the thought has crossed my mind, but it's such a big, huge, grand topic that I feel like it's something I should do when I'm like 70 or something, when I'm...
Isn't all great theater big, huge, grand topics?
Sometimes,
not all, but a lot.
Sometimes, yeah, it can be. It can be about, I don't know. That's another conversation. But theater, I think, can really be about anything.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
And another area where I know basically zilch, which will become evident as we start talking about theater eventually.
I'm sure not.
No. Be sure, yes. But back to your practice. So I practice, as we said, Vipassana. One of the most interesting things for me is the marriage of the actual meditation practice and the intellectual infrastructure. Reading books about it, listening to talks.
Yes.
So how much of that is there in Nichiren?
There's a fair amount. I mean, there's the Gosho, which are kind of like the collected writings of Nichiren Daishonin, and most of them are letters that he kind of wrote to his followers. And in those letters, you have all of this kind of amazing, frankly, very deep wisdom that you have to understand it in its cultural context, of course, but it's really profound stuff. And I do feel like I've benefited a lot from spending time with those writings. But there's also, it's a lay Buddhist organization. So, once a month I get together with a group of, 20 or 30 fellow Buddhists, and we meet in somebody's apartment. In fact, it's somebody who lives on Wall Street, but there's, 30 of us get together, and we're from all different parts of New York City and all different walks of life, and It's every different ethnicity. It's actually really great because it's the one time where I'm in a room with Asian people, black people, Hispanic people, white people, all different, walks of life, and we're all there kind of for the same reason. So it's a really cool thing.
And do you chant together?
Yeah, you chant, you do gongyo together, you chant a bit, and then people, they talk about their experiences, what's going on in their life, and how Buddhism affects their life, and we talk a little bit about doctrine. I sort of wish the conversation would be. I wish it would get a little more theoretical, but because it tends to stay pretty general because it's kind of for people who are just starting to practice. But it's great, and I always leave. I leave those meetings feeling really positive and really, like I've learned something about these people who I never otherwise would have hung out with.
How loud is the chant? You say it's subtle, but I mean, is it?
If you're chanting by yourself, it's not very loud at all, obviously. But if you're in a room with 400 people, it's loudish, but it's not crazy.
So you could do it in the next room, and your girlfriend would not be perturbed by it.
Yeah, and in fact, I really like chanting alone. I mean, I'm an only child, so I like to do a lot of things alone. So I really like to just practice on my own, and that tends to be how I practice. But when I'm with 20 people or 300 people, and we're all chanting, it can be a really cool experience as well.
Yeah, I think group practice of any sort has a certain potency to it.
Yeah,
no question about it.
But I do understand this thing of like, oh, why you're chanting these syllables that are kind of some medieval dialect of Japanese from the 13th century. Like, what does that have to do with with anything in our contemporary life? I understand that question, and there is an aspect of it that is mysterious, and I can only just say that it has had a really profound effect on my life, because when I started practicing, I was 19. Like, I literally could not get on stage and sing an entire song in front of an audience without collapsing, without like melting. And 7 years after I started practicing, I had a Grammy nomination as for best male pop singer. It was just completely like it had a very profound effect on my life.
You pin that all on the practice?
I don't pin it all on the practice.
Because your innate talent certainly played a role.
Well, but I don't think that I would have gotten to that place if I didn't have this. There's kind of this sense of this like never give up spirit that the practice kind of embodies in you.
Really? Because that's interesting, because that's not what I would describe as the impact of doing straight up mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. I think Nichiren Buddhism is much more. What's the word? It's much more about daily life and about creating value. And I think whereas like Zen Buddhism, for example, is more about, I'm going to like kind of erase my ego and kind of calm down the the voices in my head and kind of back away from that. Nichiren Buddhism is like very engaged kind of in daily life, but in a not in a sense of like proselytizing or anything, but just in a sense of the things that you're doing, are they creating value for the people in your environment?
Is it engaged in the world in the sense that people are using it so that they're more successful?
I do think that has happened quite a bit, and it is one of the ways in which Nichiren Buddhism has been painted with a little bit of a negative brush at times.
Oh, so the rap on it is people are chanting this thing in order to make money or whatever.
That has definitely occurred, and I see it in a lot of people, and I see people who are they're maybe chanting for the wrong reasons. Absolutely. And they do have this sense that it's sort of this magical, mystical thing that's going to help bring them wealth. It's sort of like people who think of Christianity like the prosperity kind of gospel and all that. That stuff to me is total nonsense. And but I also think that if that's the thing that gets them to start practicing, and then I think that if they continue to practice, that will change.
But let's unpack this for just a
Yeah,
second, because
yeah.
you said that one of the big impacts for you was you were too shy to really get up on stage, and then 7 years later you had a Grammy nom. So that does seem to put it within the context of success. But there's another way to think about it, which is that it was more about fulfilling your potential.
Yeah, absolutely, and fulfilling something that was within me, but that I think was really blocked in many ways. And that's a lifelong struggle. As you know, like you're constantly bumping up against these things inside yourself that are real, that can be hard to overcome. And so, Buddhist practice for me has been one consistently effective way of doing that. I wish I was a better practitioner and a more consistent practitioner of it. But I know it's there.
Do you think the syllables have some sort of power in and of themselves, or is it just the act of chanting? Could you be chanting the ABCs?
Yeah, no, I do think there is a distinction. I have asked that question of some people who I consider to be some very wise older men and women many times, and I do think that if you just sat there and chanted Coca-Cola over and over, there would be a very different effect, because we are talking about the law of cause and effect. And not to go too deeply into the kind of doctrinal
No, go deep,
aspect
man.
of
You're in a safe
Buddhism.
place. You can go deep as you want.
So, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is the title of the Lotus Sutra. And so when you say Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, it's kind of devotion to the great and wonderful Lotus Sutra. That's the literal translation of it. But the Lotus Sutra kind of says two things. It says two really important things. It says every human life has Buddha nature within it. Okay, so everybody, no matter who you are, where you're from, no matter how awful or foolish or wonderful or beautiful or not, everyone has this Buddha nature within you, and it's something that you can manifest. And so I think, and then the second thing it says is that Buddha nature is sort of infinite in both directions. So it's something that's always existed and will always exist kind of through time. And so not to get into, again, this is like a huge philosophical Buddhist concept of kind of the infinity of time and space, and the kind of vastness of time and space, and how this kind of connects to your own Buddha nature. And when I think through your practice you are able to connect to this understanding of the universe as this truly huge thing with all this great potential power. So
that's just awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something that's like, it doesn't happen every day, but I think it's something that you do experience at times, and it's quite profound.
Yeah, if you're getting that out of it, it seems like it's inherent. It's a valuable thing to do.
Yeah. It's great. It's great.
In the first part of the 20th century, the Hilton family had a lock on the hotel industry by offering upscale service at a modest price. The company was expanding fast and buying up iconic properties across the country, like the Plaza and the Waldorf Astoria. But their unchallenged rise wouldn't last. An ambitious Mormon named J.W. Marriott decides to pivot from restaurants to hospitality, and he's after Hilton's business, developing modern hotels across the world. But both the Hilton and Marriott families will have to contend with their share of drama in finding a successor, while also fighting to stay solvent in a high-stakes business. Hi, I'm David Brown, the host of Wondery's show Business Wars. We go deep into some of the biggest corporate rivalries of all time. In our latest season, Hilton and Marriott are in a race to expand globally and secure the loyalty of fickle customers. Make sure to follow Business Wars wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen ad-free on the Amazon Music or Wondery app.
Welcome to the Bishop Gray Academy, the country's most exclusive boarding school, a place where the best and brightest aren't fighting to be prom queen or captain of the football team. They're on track to become the next Supreme Court justice. Academy is a new scripted podcast that follows Ava Richards, a brilliant scholarship student who must quickly adapt in a school where rules mean nothing and money means everything. Ava sets her sights on being the first scholarship student to make the list, Bishop Gray's all-coveted academic top 10, curated by the headmaster himself. But with no clear path to the top, she joins the Night of the Wolf, Bishop Gray's underground society with more secrets than the Illuminati. If she bends to their demands in exchange for her own success, one of the 10 coveted spots will be hers, but at what cost? Enjoy Academy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Binge all 10 episodes of Academy early and ad-free on Wondery Plus. Join Wondery Plus over on the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts.
How have Buddhist themes shown up in your songwriting?
Yes, and sometimes more explicitly than I wish they had. Like, I'm slightly not embarrassed, but there's some things that are on my first couple records that I just feel like are so they're so kind of obvious in a way. And I never, like, again, like when I think about people, where any music that's preachy in any way, shape, or form, I really don't like it at all. And so I've really tried to avoid that. But there are some, there are certainly songs that have a lot of Buddhist themes and some kind of Buddhist imagery within them. And again, I'm like I feel a little bit embarrassed about it, but it's what I did when I was in my 20s.
I mean, I think you can get a pass. You're in your 20s.
Yeah.
You were dealing with a big wave of early success.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine it just throws one up against a lot of these themes of desire and I would imagine primarily desire.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's funny because also, I mean, in Nichiren Buddhism, there's this idea that earthly desires equal enlightenment. And I know that sounds crazy probably to many people. But there is this sense that if you didn't have desire, then you'd have no motivation to kind of do anything. So it's I think there is this process in your practice where your desire, not that your desires become purified, because that sounds very puritanical, and Buddhism is not that at all, but your desires become kind of clearer, and the things that are going to make you truly happy, those things become clearer. So yeah, of course, in my 20s, and the things that I was excited about, were really obvious things, like hanging out with models and, making money and having nice cars and nice apartments and recording studios and all that. And, of course, those, I wasn't immune to that by any stretch. But I do think at a certain point, the things that make you truly happy become clearer. And certainly, like, through, when I sit down to chant now, it's really about, like, can I write a piece of music that's going to affect somebody's heart? Is it going to take them to some mysterious, unexpected place when they hear this music that they didn't know they had it in them? And if I can do that, that's the thing that really means the most to me.
So this theme of desire, I don't know if I can speak about this with any cogency, but Dr. Mark Epstein, who's a friend of mine and a previous guest,
a friend of mine as well.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So Epstein wrote a book called Open to Desire, in which he tries to sort of invert the denigration of desire that is very common in mainstream Buddhism, which is desires like the enemy.
Yes.
But he actually, and again, I don't know if I can restate this accurately, and I might get an angry phone call from Mark here, but he says that basically, desire is important. It is what gets you out of bed, and it can be something also to watch with mindfulness and investigation to see how there's a poignancy in the fact that even when your desires are fulfilled, we're not fully satisfied.
Yeah. And
so to watch that is actually a source of potential wisdom. So there seems to be a very rich field that you've just touched on.
Yeah, I mean, not to go into too great detail, but I've had many long conversations with Mark about this and about my own desire for drinking and drugs and, sex and money and all these things that we do get wrapped up in in this New York City world that we live in. And he what was great about Mark was that he was just so calm and so kind and so compassionate and so non-judgmental.
Exactly, non-judgmental.
That, and just saying, like you just said, just kind of look at it and try and understand where it's coming from and let it pass.
So I know a little bit about desire for drugs, and I read, and I could be wrong about this. You correct me. Did you go to rehab for a little bit?
I did.
And so this was back in like 2011.
Yes.
So the practice of Buddhism, it's not going to solve all of your problems, and this would be an interesting case study.
Yeah, I mean, it was it was a very intense time for me. It was kind of a couple years after the success of Spring Awakening, and I think myself and my collaborators all kind of thought that that after that show everything was going to be easy street after that. Like all the opportunities were going to come, and the show was going to run for 10 years, but a lot of things happened where that just wasn't the case, and I found myself all of a sudden kind of living the life I always wanted to live, and I had all this money in the bank and I was really like happy, and all of a sudden it was 3 years later it was gone. And
why?
A combination of factors, but I sold some real estate, I bought some real estate, I spent a lot of money building a recording studio, and I wasn't being careful with my just lifestyle in general.
And the show didn't run as long as you thought.
Yeah, and there were a lot of things that were supposed to kind of happen that didn't happen. And I found myself just kind of, I was like really depressed. And, the next show that I wrote called Whisper House, which a show that I'm really proud of, and it's actually going to be staged in London this spring. But, we did it at the Old Globe in San Diego, and it didn't transfer to Broadway. And, like all these records I was making, I was like having to make these records and make them kind of on my own dime. And I wasn't making that much money from touring, and it was just sort of like it just sort of evaporated over the course of a few years. And I was doing work that I was proud of, but I was just sort of like, what's going on? So I think I was definitely drinking way too much to kind of just compensate for that, or to kind of dull that whatever it was, guilt or shame or self-criticism. But again, when I went to rehab, it kind of made me just feel like, I just need to practice more intensely. Like, AA, as much as I admire and respect those folks, it's not what I believe in at all. And so it kind of brought me back to my practice again, so I'm very grateful for that.
Just to fill in some of the details that some listeners may not be familiar with, and I'll start this and then you can finish it, because I will unquestionably run afoul of facts. So you transitioned at one point from being kind of like a 90s and 2000s era emo troubadour to writing for the stage.
Yes.
And Spring Awakening was a huge hit. And it was a remake of a German...
So it's based on a play that was written in 1891 by Frank Wedekind, and it's kind of thought of as the first German expressionist play, and it's a very racy piece about teenagers who are trying to understand the birds and the bees, and the parents and the teachers and the clergy in their very kind of strict Lutheran environment, kind of bourgeois environment. They don't give them the necessary information, and then kind of all hell breaks loose in various ways. And so we did a version of the show where the scenes are set in 1891, but when the kids sing, they kind of become contemporary kids, and the music is alternative rock, for indie rock, for lack of a better term. And at the time, it was a very, I don't know, very groundbreaking thing, because everyone said, "Oh, this show will never ever work. It certainly will never go to Broadway. You might be able to do it off Broadway and do it on this kind of, go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival or something." But it did turn into this really interesting cultural moment, and it was great. It was a lot of fun.
And you've kept going with theater.
Yeah. So, again, it's hard to give you the list of all the things that are kind of in development. But recently, I just did American Psycho, which was also on Broadway.
Big Buddhist themes in that, right?
Well, it's funny. I mean, American Psycho is I don't know that most people understood this, but it's a real critique of a lot of the values that kind of happen in the period of late capitalism. And so I do think of it as actually very Buddhist, in the sense that it's a critique of those things. But
I rescind my snarky remark. I rarely do that.
but it's also meant to be, and it's supposed to be an entertainment. And so I think one of the problems with American Psycho is that it was kind of trying to be many, many different things, and tonally it might have felt a bit uneven because of that, where it's supposed to be funny and kind of outrageous and insane, but also moralizing on some level about about what happens when the only thing you care about are material things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are legit Buddhist themes and explicit Buddhist themes, as I understand it, in Spring Awakening, which I apologize I've never seen, but I've read you talking about it a little bit. Can you talk about it here?
Yeah. Well, so in Buddhism, there's this idea that at any given moment, you're kind of shifting through these 10 different life states. So hell, hunger, animality, anger, tranquility, rapture, learning, realization, bodhisattva, which is like compassion and enlightenment. And at any given moment, you're in one of these, inhabiting one of these states, and we all know what they are. Like, if when you're in hell, you're in hell. When you're in hunger, you're in the state of desire. When you're just chilling in your house, you might be in a state of tranquility.
I'm mostly in animality.
Animality is, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm eating food out of a bowl on the floor.
No, but yeah, it's really, animality is more the state of being sort of like a sycophant, where you're kind of kissing up to people above you and kind of pissing on people below you. But anyway, so there are these 10 life states, and I think that really great pieces of art, whether it's a really fantastic movie or a really great play or a musical, I think that they are able to kind of show the human condition in all of those different life states. Yeah. And certainly in Spring Awakening, you do have all of those life states kind of represented in terms of the what happens to these kids and their kind of reaction to it. And so you look at something like Les Mis, for example. You have all of these really profound human emotions, and they're all represented there. So,
but being a teenager is such an interesting time, I would imagine, as an artist to play with, because it's just like raw id on so many levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when I mean, obviously, I care deeply about music, but that was when music affected me in the most kind of intense way. When you're 15 and 16, and I have my headphones on, and I'm listening to some Talk record or Depeche Mode record or whatever it was. Like, that was the most that was when it was like, oh, this song really changed my whole being. Yes. So
it feels like I didn't plan to go here. But what you're talking about is actually striking a chord with me, because music mattered so much to me, not only as a teenager, but even in my early 20s when I was starting out in TV news and I was living in Bangor, Maine, and listening to Guided by Voices records and Pavement records. And it felt to me like transmissions from a more sophisticated world and a connection to something bigger. And it really did... I don't know. I have meaning to that. I have trouble articulating.
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, as I'm now in my mid-40s, is I feel like it has a lot less meaning to me now.
I know. I know, and I hesitate to say that's because there's not as much good music being produced now, because there are some really great records and really great bands out there, but you have to really look in the nooks and crannies to find them.
But you don't think it's an age thing where, maybe other things have taken, I have a kid now.
Yeah.
His music taste is terrible, by the way. His favorite song
Does he listen to Kids Bop?
He listens to "You've Got to Move." I like to move it. What's that song? I like to move it. That song.
Okay.
That's his big. It's not even a kid's song. It's just
Right.
a terrible techno song.
Yeah.
No offense to the Madagascar 5 who put that record out. I happen to know. But I still listen to a lot of music, especially when I'm working out, and I still like. Pitchfork is still the first thing I look at in the morning because I want to know what's coming out. But I feel like it doesn't have the meaning that it did to me, even in my late 30s. And I don't know that maybe that's an idiosyncratic thing, or maybe it happens as you get older, and that's just kind of sad.
No, I think it's true. I think pop music has certain limits, has certain limitations. And if I, now as a 46-year-old, if I'm looking for something that's really, really going to affect me in a deep way, I've got to be listening to Arvo Pärt or Steve Reich or some John Adams or some 20th century kind of classical composer that it's a little more musically nutritional, for lack of a better word. And I don't really necessarily find that in pop music, because I've just, I've grown out of it on some level. I still really love pop music, and there's certain things that can be fantastic. And, I love Kendrick Lamar, and I love, some of The Weeknd, and I love some Kanye stuff.
Me too.
But
notwithstanding some of his stranger public pronouncements, he's a great musician.
Yeah, so it's not like I'm I've divorced myself from it, but it's it serves sort of a very different function in a way. And I love a lot of electronic music, but usually it's the more avant-garde stuff and things like Richie Hawtin and stuff like that. So.
I find that it's playing like a utilitarian purpose, which is to get me through 3 miles on the treadmill.
Right, and I understand that too. But that to me gets tiresome. But then again, the last Radiohead record, it's gorgeous. It's really a piece of beauty. So people are still making great records. It's just they're not in the wider culture as much as they should be. Is my opinion.
Right. What else? Now that we've explored the depths of your mind, soul, and chanting abilities, what are you working on that we can go check out?
Well, so the main things theater-wise I'm working on is a stage adaptation of Secret Life of Bees, which is a hugely popular book by Sue Monk Kidd, and we should be hopefully workshopping that. In 2017, we have an amazing director, Sam Gold, and amazing writer, Lynn Nottage, and Susan Birkenhead doing the lyrics. It's a really great team. I'm doing an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland with Stephen Sater, which is called Alice by Heart. I have a show called Noir that hopefully will be staged in 2017. And, I'm actually trying next year to take a little time off, because this past year has been so busy. Where I put out a record last October, and I toured in November with Suzanne Vega, and I had 2 shows on Broadway, and it was just way too much. So this year,
and you're trying to maintain a relationship, and
do all that good stuff. But I'm trying to I have some commitments this year coming up, but I'm trying to kind of take most of the year off, so to speak. But that really to write the next Duncan Sheik record, and not have these things that are sort of like homework, but just be involved in creative pursuits that are more pure, I guess you could say.
What a pleasure to sit and talk to you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No, the thanks goes from me to you for coming in. I really appreciate it. This is just totally interesting. Is there anything, before I let you go, that I should have asked but didn't ask? Any other points you want to make? Anything else we should know about?
No, the only thing I was going to say was interesting, because I I'll admit, I did a little research on you before I came in, and I watched the piece where you kind of talked about your anxiety attack, and it's funny, like one of the reasons I recognized that immediately as something that plagued me, and it happened to me actually fairly recently. I was teaching. I was artist in residence at NYU at the Clive Davis School of Music, and it happened to me during a class.
Wow.
Where I was, I had 30 kids there, and I just sort of like froze up, and it's that thing where your throat clenches up, and it's like it's this crazy thing, and actually that was one of the other things that got me to start practicing, because I was really kind of freaked out by the fact that could happen to me.
Your body can rebel.
So anyway, I feel like you're a real kindred spirit in that way, that we had this experience, and it's like, whoa.
There are a lot of us out there.
Yeah.
It is not, it's, panic attacks are a real thing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, just on your recent panic attack, had you had enough sleep the night before?
Probably not. Probably not.
That can really do it.
Yeah.
There was my shrink, the guy who I went to after I actually had 2 panic attacks. The second one was much more mild.
Yeah.
And I've had plenty of panic attacks, but these were the 2 televised
Right.
ones. And after the second one, I went to this shrink at NYU, who's an expert in panic, and he really, first of all, he helped me point out that one major exacerbating factor was a little thing known as cocaine.
Right.
So quitting that actually stopped the panic attacks, or really nipped them in the bud in a big way.
Yeah.
But the problem is, once you learn how to panic, you get very good at it.
Yeah.
And what he pointed out is that the best way to deal with them is preventive. It's just preventive
Lifestyle.
self-care.
Yeah.
And he used an animal analogy that I sort of didn't remember it correctly. So a couple of years later, I went back to him and I was like, remember that time you said I should treat myself like a stallion? And he said, no. I meant thoroughbred. And because I, of course, like a kitten looking in the mirror and seeing a lion, I, of course, thought he meant stallion.
Right.
But the point is, if you take good care of yourself, don't drink too much coffee, get enough sleep, exercise, all the annoying crap, the likelihood of a panic attack, I found, vastly diminished.
Right. Totally. I agree 100%.
But I'm sorry to happen to you recently.
Yeah. But I think it's it's something that we have it inside us, and it's like a lifelong thing to kind of to escape from that karma, perhaps.
Yeah, I would agree. Duncan Sheik, thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much.
Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right, there's another edition of the 10% Happier podcast. If you like it, I'm going to hit you up for a favor. Please subscribe to it, review it, and rate it. I want to also thank the people who produce this podcast: Josh Cohan, Lauren Efron, Sarah Amos, and the head of ABC News Digital, Dan Silver. And hit me up at Twitter, Dan B. Harris. See you next time.
Hey, Prime members. You can listen to 10% Happier early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the Amazon Music app today. Or you can listen early and ad-free with Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts. Before you go, do us a solid and tell us all about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey.